Tough act to follow. I'm Jonathan Seelig. It's a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to be here as part of this inaugural ceremony. And there are a lot of amazing people in here this evening, and a number of them I connect to directly. It all comes about through my wife, who is an amazing person, and my life wouldn't be what it is today without her. But the 5 people specifically who I want to talk about, who I was trying to find a way to pull these 5 people together and thinking about what I would say this evening, are Sandra Gold, Arnold Gold, Ron Archie, Pearl Hurwitz, and Marge Cohen. And when I look at all 5 of these people changed the world in absolutely incredible ways. And many of them continue to change the world in amazing ways. And when I look at these 5 people, I try to look for some sort of a unifying character trait, some sort of a unifying theme. And what I see in all 5 of these people is that they are entirely relentless. Now I know that all of you with mother-in-laws feel like perhaps they are relentless, but in this case, really all 5 people entirely relentless. And sometimes it's interesting to think about what a word means by thinking a little bit about it's not necessarily its antonym, but its opposite. What do you think is the opposite of that character trait? And this relentlessness that I see in all 5 of these people changing the world, the opposite of that would be paralysis and an inability to make change, to do something, to step up when the need arises. And then I think about this idea of relentlessness and what it means to be relentless, and I think, well, hold on a second. All of the most evil people in the history of the world have also been described as relentless. So what makes good relentless on one side, and what makes very bad relentless on the other side? And I think that there are 2 attributes that need to be combined with that relentlessness for it to really serve the world and to create an enormous amount of good. And the first is that it happens because of and with empathy or love. And the opposite of that, when we think about it, is apathy and not caring. And then second, it happens with vulnerability and openness. And the opposite of that, in many ways, is pride. And I look at that as sort of being this set of attributes that I see across all 5 of these people. 28 years ago, Sandra and Arnold Gold saw a need for a change in medical education. And they were and continue to be relentless. They're relentless out of their love for medicine. They are relentless out of their empathy for patients and their families. And the white coat ceremony at Columbia University 22 years ago would not have happened were it not for those efforts, and all of the incredible work of the Gold Foundation would not have happened were it not for those relentless efforts. And then Ron, who over an incredible career as a towering figure in the medical community, has served medical students at Harvard Medical School, patient populations at numerous hospitals, and then indigent diabetic populations, and a real outreach to the African American and Hispanic communities in Boston who were incredibly underserved when it came to that particular disease. And of the thousands of students who he's touched, all will tell you that he's done that relentlessly, with love, with empathy, and with an incredible connection that comes only from a vulnerability and putting one's pride aside. And then Ron chose to create an award and to name it for my grandmother, Pearl Hurwitz. Grandma Pearl was really an amazing woman. She was wise, she was loving, she was driven, she was kind. And I want to tell you a little bit about her. She was born in 1907, and she was incredibly smart. She was accepted to Radcliffe at age 16. She told the story of having wept the first day of college when she first set foot into Widener Library. The opportunity to be in there with those books in that place was so overwhelming to her. And her path to relentlessly changing the world started in 1937 with the birth of her second son, Stephen. Her first son, Michael, my uncle is here, my Aunt Nancy, my cousin Richard, and Letty. And there are no better words to describe the fight that she fought for the mentally retarded in Massachusetts than her own words, which I will read to you in just a moment. But just to give you a little bit of the context, she became one of the very early women to raise a mentally retarded child at home as opposed to institutionalizing him after receiving the diagnosis when he was 3 years of age. And then she became the founding president of the Massachusetts Association for Retarded Children, an advocacy group. She drove changes in schools, in cities, in the state. She served on commissions for 2 governors through the 1950s. And she did all of this with love, with empathy, and with vulnerability. And to give you a little sense of that vulnerability and how she engaged with us, I'm going to read to you a little bit from a piece that my grandmother wrote in 1957 in the Radcliffe Quarterly. February of 1957, it's an absolutely stunning piece of writing and of emotional connection to this. She opens by saying, "I'm the parent of a mentally retarded child. The second of my 4 children, Stephen, who is now 19 years old, was born mentally retarded. It is not easy, even after 19 years, to speak openly about a situation in one's family which is somehow considered shameful, guilt-ridden, and to be hidden." She continues for a while, and later in this piece, she talks about receiving the diagnosis. She says, "We went one day just before Stephen's 3rd birthday to the famed neurological clinic at the Children's Medical Center, and we left him overnight for diagnosis. Then the blow came. I remember I went alone that day to hear about Stephen. I knew much was amiss. Perhaps I went alone because I could not bear to face my husband and the awful truth with other eyes watching. I was not prepared for what I did hear. I was told that Stephen was severely mentally retarded, that he would never develop beyond childhood, that I should take steps to send him away immediately to some institution for the rest of his life for the sake of my other child and my family. The physician who spoke to me was very kind. She tried to make me understand that Stephen's rate of mental growth would be progressively slower, how difficult it would be to keep Stephen at home as he grew older, how withdrawn and lacking in understanding neighbors would be, especially since I lived in a large city. She told me that an institution can be very good for a child who needs that environment. I heard her voice dimly through my confusion, the blood rising in terrible, painful waves to my face and head. I took my dead child who was living and went home with him." And then she says, "No one thought at all that perhaps one does not send a little boy away from a happy home just because he is different. No one thought at all that perhaps the little boy's brother might love him and need him too, rather than be harmed by his presence in the household." Again, both the work and the words full of empathy, of love, of vulnerability, and of relentless, relentless pursuit. And that brings us to Marge Cohen, who relentlessly has pursued the treatment of women and children with HIV/AIDS, first at Cook County, and as though that wasn't enough effort, energy, challenge, and effort, then in Rwanda. And then beyond that, incredible work to create a grassroots organization that would be able to really serve people after her return. So these 5 people connect for me in really incredible and deep and important ways. And I'm honored and humbled to be here tonight. I'm incredibly inspired, and I'm enormously grateful for the personal connection that I have to Sandra, to Arnold, to Ron, to Marge now, and of course to Grandma Pearl. I hope that this evening inspires us all to love, to be vulnerable, and to be relentless.